Hey, so cool to see you. Come on in, I want to show you my cave of metamorphosis. I'm so glad we're going to get to spend some time together. Pull up a chair. Hey, I'm Josh, 37 years old, born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa. Cup of tea? I'm actually going to take off this jacket. I had to shed layers through this journey, some of these outer shells that we wear, these personas. And there's liberation that can come from that, and it can kind of be cold sometimes too. But hey, so have you traveled much? After graduating high school, I just wanted to travel. I cruised around the world for like 10 years and I went to 24 countries, living and working in lots of them. But I tell you what, by far the most interesting terrain I've ever explored is the mysterious and treasure-filled and sometimes treacherous place of my own mind, the human mind. And my experiences are reflections of the possibilities of your own consciousness. The line between my inner world and my outer world dissolved until I now found myself living a version of the American dream. There's some nightmare components, but it's very dreamlike. I'm a passionate surfer, and where I grew up in South Africa has the highest concentration of great white sharks in the world. The water is alive with power, and so is the land. It's the Rainbow Nation with 11 official languages and is a place of deep and multifaceted spirituality. I used to pray to God when I heard that there were sharks in the literal water, but I experienced God when I dove into the subconscious depths of my own mind, a place that I also found was alive and inhabited. It's now given me a passion to explore the intersection of the realms of psychology, spirituality, and philosophy, and to re-imbue the world that the next generation will inhabit, including my two daughters of 8 and 5, with a forgotten magic that turns life into the greatest of adventures. I've discovered doors in our mind that can connect us to dimensions of reality that are as real or more real than this one, and which can inform and enrich our perspective on this reality, putting it in a higher view. This has helped to initiate a metamorphosis in my life, making me a better husband, a better father, friend, human being. It's a process, but it's a process that's happening. It's also given me deep meaning and purpose, which today has landed me on your screen. NAMI, been life-changing for me. The National Alliance on Mental Illness is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization, and we provide advocacy, education, support, and public awareness so that all people affected by mental health conditions can lead better lives. There's NAMI resources in your area, check it out, just Google it. It's all across the country and it can be really life-changing, and it has been for me. And the purpose which brings us all here today is to offer insights that provide support in the roles that matter to us all. To be better siblings, co-workers, neighbors, service providers, parents, spouses, and friends. Mental health conditions in ourselves or in someone we care about can impact those roles. And so my story that you'll hear today describes how mental health has impacted me and my relationships with others. And I'm going to share with you warning signs and describe the kinds of habits and changes that support my mental health. And we're going to do this in 3 sections. We'll talk about what happened, what helps, and what's next. And after each section, I really would love to hear from you guys. If you could put your comments down below, your thoughts, your questions, your feelings, what you resonate with, because really I'm here for you and I want to speak about what you're most interested in hearing. So let's get this party started. I really appreciate you spending some time here with me today. I tell you what, mental health changes us. It can knock us off the platforms that we built for ourselves and change our external appearance and knock us to the floor. So let's talk about what happened with me. My story. Well, my story doesn't start with me, because we're all parts of much larger stories that transcend us. These powerful bio-psychosocial spiritual currents that work through us. On the physical side, I inherited serious mental health conditions from both sides of my family, schizophrenia on the one side and bipolar on the other. And my dad's untreated mental health condition and substance abuse, which go together 75% of the time, ended up costing him his life when I was 18. He couldn't take his story anymore and decided to end it. And for me, the catalyst that awoken the dormant potential of my own mind was also substance. Marijuana, which I'll call weed. I started smoking at 16 years old, and from the beginning, the weed seemed to have a mind of its own. This realm of consciousness we inhabit is far more mysterious than we sometimes think. That's why it's officially referred to in scientific circles as the hard problem of consciousness. We don't quite know what it is. So I took 2 little peeks down Alice's rabbit hole on my world travels before taking my final plummet. My first peek was in San Francisco when I was 22. After smoking, I prayed for the Holy Spirit in the bathroom mirror, and suddenly the room got dark and I felt like fire descended. When I came out of the bathroom, I believed I could telepathically communicate with this dog, and I was being bombarded by these high dimensional downloads, which were just giving me epiphany after epiphany. I could look deep into my brother's eyes and see into his soul. I knew when my phone was going to ring and who was calling, and I knew when the birds were going to fly past. After about an hour of this, I managed to climb my way out of Alice's rabbit hole and come back to mutual consensus reality, and I was like, what was that? It was literally mind-blowing. I didn't know these things were possible. So this fueled a passionate research spree for me. I read the Bible cover to cover and then proceeded to read the New Testament through 7 times in the next 6 months. And what I learned from all my research is that the mystics and spiritual masters of a whole bunch of different types of world religion have experienced these states of consciousness, but learned how to navigate it. But then I had a darker transcendent encounter on weed in Cape Town, South Africa about a year later. This time I felt like I could sense the cycling of karmic energy, and my friends were flicking back and forth between being different people and these story characters. I myself was flicking back and forth between being Jesus and Satan, and I thought that they were brothers. Later came to learn that this is what Mormons believe. But this time I sensed a malevolence, a dark side to these high dimensional downloads, and that scared me. So I stopped smoking weed for 8 years. Moved over to the land of the free and the home of the brave, met my wife in a karaoke bar, and we had our first daughter at the time. I got my bachelor's in psychology because of my fascination with the mind, and I was in seminary getting my master's in theology up in Pasadena in LA. And I was still passionate about the intersection between spirituality and psychedelics. And so I was asking around and praying, and I believed that God was leading me to smoke weed one more time. So I drove up to the mountains of Crestline, this tree-filled beautiful terrain, and once more smoked and pierced through the veil of reality. But this time I fell so far down the rabbit hole that I couldn't find my way out, and I stayed down in Wonderland for a month and a half despite not touching weed again. And what was so-called psychosis like? It was like the line between my inner world and my outer world dissolved until everything was a lucid dream happening within my mind. And at the same time, I was the whole external world too. I was you and every other person experiencing one consciousness from different angles. I followed a series of synchronicities or divine coincidences, these signs on the pavement, birds that would hop from branch to branch, until I came to the realization that I was the next version of Jesus Christ himself. But whereas Jesus, when he was faced with ideas about grandiosity in the desert, submitted in humility, I was like, okay, this is all a lucid dream and I'm the next version of Jesus, watch this. And I decided to put on a show. But law enforcement didn't like my show, and they arrested me because they thought I was on LSD, which I wasn't, I was just having a manic episode. But this led me to have a criminal record, so the 2 people with disabilities that we were being paid to look after in our home were taken from our home, and it cost us our income. We ended up selling a condo that we owned, and over the next period I blew $86,000. When I was in my euphoric states, I would just give it away to people on the street, and I would engage in these extravagant artistic projects. But then when I got thrust into a deep depression after being put on heavy antipsychotic medication and coming off too quickly, I couldn't do anything and we needed the money for living expenses. All I could do was lie in the park and try to read the book of Job in the Bible over and over. Overall, I was arrested twice and 5150 or taken to a psychiatric hospital against my will 6 times. I had to drop my classes at school, I had to quit my job, I caused deep rifts in relationships. And I do things like put myself in physical danger by jumping from white line to white line in the middle of moving traffic. It was all a game for me, but a confusing one. I was diagnosed bipolar type 1 and the mental health system was tricky to navigate. I was being told that I had a disability, an incurable lifelong one, and I needed to lower my expectations of what was possible. I've now come to see that very differently, as we'll talk about later. One of the barriers to accepting support was that I loved my euphoric spells, and they were some of the most riveting experiences of my life. I was also receiving a lot of external validation that I was really onto something with objective evidence. I was able to tell 2 of my good friends things that happened to them when they were kids in a lot of detail that they'd never told me before, which turned out to be true. And my brother said that I was reading his mind verbatim, word for word. But then in my depressive season, that was the worst time of my life, and I looked for all the help I could get, and I managed to find plenty of it, which is the good news, and we'll talk about that in the next section. But at this point, I'd love to hear from you if you could put your comments in the chat. What stood out? What do you resonate with? What are your thoughts? Do you have any questions? Okay, so what helps? What helped me to get to my feet? Well, as humans, I believe that we're biopsychosocial spiritual beings and that thriving involves enriching each one of these aspects. So let's touch on them one by one so I can share some of the things that elevated me and maybe they could help you too or the people that you love. So firstly, as biological beings, we're this amphibious blend of both animalistic mud as well as angelic creative spirit. And I found just the right dose and type of medication could allow me to gravitate at the right height between these two domains. A balance between not being so down and stuck in the mud that I can't do anything, versus also not being so heavenly minded that I'm no earthly good. I learned to float at the right height in this human condition. And floating could be a good term. The famous mythologist and comparative religion professor Joseph Campbell says the person in psychosis is drowning in the same water in which the mystic swims with delight. So I found medications could be cutting-edge neurotechnology that allowed me to swim in this water. Seeing them as that kind of a tool instead of these crazy pills that made me normal was really powerful for me. I never wanted to be normal anyway. And finding open-minded psychiatrists and therapists who could collaboratively take direction as well as give direction was paradigm shifting for me. I'm not all about medications though. I think they definitely serve a purpose, and for some people that can be a purpose that serves them well for the rest of their life. And then for others, they could be periods or seasons where people can get off medications. I myself have been able to get off all my medications and have been without them for years now. But that's not the case with everyone. If they could be these powerful tools that enhance cognitive functioning for the rest of our lives, that's a really valuable thing to have in our repertoire. So that's the biological side. What about the psychological and intellectual side? Well, for me, developing conceptual water wings was really important to me and reframing what my bipolar 1 diagnosis was. As humans, we're story-making beings, and the stories we tell ourselves about what these conditions of neurodiversity are really help to frame the metamorphosis that ensues. So putting aside the stigma that is so prevalent, I learned to see these conditions as potential gifts if navigated correctly. And I came to this understanding by watching the movie with Katie Holmes called Touched with Fire, and it's based on an epic book by Kay Redfield Jamison by the same title. I watched YouTube channels like Sean Blackwell's Am I Bipolar or Waking Up, found Facebook groups like Shades of Awakening, and learned theoretical frameworks like in psychology the thinking of Jordan Peterson and Carl Jung, in spirituality, Christian mysticism, panentheism, and the non-duality of Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, in science things like panpsychism and biocentrism, and in philosophy Platonism, idealism, and postmodernism. So that's a lot of isms. So biopsychosocial, in the social section we'll talk about another ism, and that's the isolation of Western individualism. Sometimes we can feel so disconnected from others. But I found a newfound authenticity and deepness of connection by connecting to the mental health community. And I managed to find these open and vibrant souls at church groups, at the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, or DBSA, at mental health groups, at RAP groups, or Wellness Recovery Action Plan, and at PET classes, or Peer Employment Training. I've also discovered such a powerful community in this little movement I started called Aslan's Rainbow, as well as Facebook groups and my work with NAMI, with the in-home outreach team. This opened up a powerful world to me that I never knew existed before. What family and friends did to support me in my mental health struggles was not be judgmental. They met me where I was at and had patience to hear me out. They naturally embraced the model by Dr. Amador, the LEAP model, which is L for listen, E for empathize with the emotion underlying it, A for agree with the components where you can, and P for partner in coming alongside people to support them in their own goals. So biopsychosocial spiritual, finally, as spiritual beings, I've learned to be very cautious about the realms of consciousness that psychedelics put us in touch with. If we use a metaphor of like a gnome teleporting to the middle of Times Square, now it's very important who that gnome comes across first. It could be a nice old granny who takes the gnome in and feeds the gnome cookies, or it could be the circus who kidnaps him and traps him. So I've learned to have these mystical experiences completely substance-free. And what helped me with getting off weed was investment into this world, in this mutual consensus reality. I've embraced the slogan that came to me in my mania, it's more glorious the more you drag it out. I've researched a ton of near-death experience accounts, and what I've learned is that we get to taste of all these metaphysical delights after death anyway. So since we get to have our cake and eat it, I've decided to go as deep as I can within this mutual space-time continuum, this shared reality. And deep we'll go as we move onwards and upwards into our final section. But I'd love to hear from you again. What helps you? Which aspects here resonate the most with you? And is there anything that has helped you that I haven't mentioned that you could share with everyone else? again, we're in this together. All right, so what's next? Well, for me, bipolar hasn't been a disability, but a metamorphosis. And yes, metamorphosis involves mass. The caterpillar has to dissolve its molecular structure to re-emerge as the butterfly. If you're going to renovate your house, you're going to create some dust and some mess as you knock down the walls. But I found a freedom and an authenticity in the removal of walls, and vibrant opportunity to let the sun's light in and for it to catch the colors of my newly emerging butterfly wings and reflect that light to others. In a way, I had to lose myself to find myself. Although my passions were always psychology and spirituality, I couldn't see myself being a therapist confined by 4 literal walls, and I couldn't see myself being a pastor confined by the 4 walls of doctrine, and so I didn't quite know what I was going to do. But now, by going through this mental health journey and discovering this field, I found unfathomable potential. I believe we're on the forefront of a consciousness revolution, and I get to come alongside those who are on the leading wave and genuinely help them in their own metamorphosis. Like, we don't go around cutting people out of cocoons. If you cut a caterpillar out of its cocoon before it's developed the patience and the strength of pushing up against the walls, it'll fall to the floor and die because it can't fly. No, I come alongside people and give them the tools and just walk with them on this journey as they learn to liberate themselves. I absolutely love what I get to do for NAMI, and it's such a blessing in my life, and I've met the most interesting people, I tell you what. And geniuses. In the Alice in Wonderland metaphor, I went from wearing the hat of the Mad Hatter to my graduation hat, and I went back to seminary to get my master's in theology. So this time I get to put on a jacket, but in a different capacity, and a lighter colored one at that. Yes. And I'm using my education to build theoretical frameworks that chart out the terrain of neurodiversity, and to consider what the implications are for the spiritual dimension. I have a dream of starting a version of Professor Xavier from the X-Men School for the Gifted. In the X-Men, you know, there's a certain type of person who's what they call a mutant, who has these superpowers. Let's take Cyclops, for example. Cyclops could shoot lasers from his eyes, but was going around destroying everything in his world and hurting people because he didn't know how to control this ability. Professor Xavier took him into the School for the Gifted, gave him these cutting-edge technologies, and taught him the self-control to navigate this superpower. And Cyclops could then control his laser beams and became a superhero at the service of humanity. But he needed a community, he needed a framework. And through my little community, Aslan's Rainbow, I've found this. If you want to see what I'm up to, check out southafricanjosh.com, because it'd be so cool to have your ideas for this journey too. None of us can do it alone, but together we can. If you replace the I in mental illness with a we, then mental illness becomes mental wellness. And sometimes people with diagnoses can be like the canaries in the coal mines that signal it's time for a greater societal metamorphosis in the direction of holistic wellness. Personally, I'm inspired to achieve increasing levels of awakening completely sober, and to follow in the footsteps of the religious reformers who simultaneously grounded in spirituality and what had come before while reaching for new heights. I believe we're on the forefront of a consciousness revolution here, and right here with NAMI and with you, this is the leading wave. We're in the land of opportunity and a time of opportunity, and that's my dream, to bring the depth and power of African origins into synergy with the culturally transformative capacity of California, and to position ourselves perfectly to ride this coming energetical wave that's heading our direction, which is going to be thrilling to ride, which is going to transport us all as a society to new places, and which is going to leave the sandbanks of the underlying terrain forever changed for coming generations of society. It's been an honor to surf with you today. Let's keep surfing, and let me know your thoughts. What stood out? What resonates with you? What are your ideas? Your mind is so valuable to me. Thanks for cruising. Onwards and upwards.